Hey guys, Chris from the Ultimate Recycler. Welcome back to the channel. Recently on my channel we showed some floods that we've had recently. The big Goulburn River that runs through our town and runs right past a cafe that my girls run had a record flood, the highest even eclipsing the 1974 flood, so it's been a big flood. The water went 2 feet through the girls' cafe, and there's been a fair bit of damage around the district, and other towns have copped it worse than we have. But this video is about repairing some stuff that's been under the floodwater. Now, the girls gave me a box of electronic stuff here. There's an iPad, a mobile hotspot, some chargers, a little square chip reader for their payment system. I don't think I can do much with that, and I'll tell you why in a minute. I've done a bit of checking, but in this video we are going to see if we can fix this Makita job site radio. You can tell by the state of it, it has been completely submerged under the floodwaters, and it probably would have been under for about 2 or 3 days. So let's see if we can fix it. But first I'll have a bit of a chat about the other stuff and why you should possibly be able to save some electronics from being submerged and perhaps not others. Being the ultimate recycler, I really want to save absolutely everything, but the problem with these devices is you can see the silt on them from the floodwaters. They have a battery in them, and generally speaking, electronics will survive if there's no power. But because these had power in them with their battery, the iPad will also, of course, have a battery, and I think this little square chip reader also does. You're going to get short circuits in there. The floodwater isn't distilled water, it's carrying a lot of silt. There's probably all sorts of minerals and toxins in the water. Things are going to short out, and I don't know that these things are going to be any good because they had power in them. The other problem, of course, is that they're going to corrode quite quickly, and to clean them out, especially the iPad, I had a quick look online to actually dismantle an iPad and get to the batteries. It's a pretty involved exercise. They're all basically glued together. You need a heat gun, you need specialized tools, specialized knowledge to remove the screen. It's not an easy DIY fix, so I don't know that I'm going to be able to do anything with these. The chargers themselves would probably be okay, but there's not a lot of value there to really save, and it's not a huge amount of waste anyway, but it's a shame we can't save it easily. However, the radio, even though it's been underwater for probably about 3 days, as I said, it doesn't have a battery pack with it. I think these ones can run on a battery. I'll have to familiarise myself with these. I haven't actually had one of these before. So yes, it will have a battery plug into it. Oh, look at all this sludge in here. I'm going to have to wash this out with a hose first. So you can plug like a power tool battery onto this when you're on a work site, but it hasn't got one with it. It was just being run from the mains through an adapter there. So there would have been no electricity in this device when it went underwater. So hopefully there's no electronic issues, but we are going to need to give it a thorough clean out before we try and power it up. Okay, so my plan of attack here is I'm just going to put these wires. There's a cable for I think they must have been playing through an iPod or perhaps an iPhone, playing some music. The cables I think will wash up all right. The charger should be okay. I'm just going to put them in a bucket of fresh water and just give them a good rinse. And as for the radio, I'm going to take it out on the lawn and hose it off and give it a really good brush off to get rid of all this silt, and then once it's clean on the outside, we'll look at getting into it and cleaning it on the inside. Now, a bit more water is not going to hurt it. I don't know how the speakers are going to survive. They may not be any good, but we've got nothing to lose to try, so we'll see how we go. Okay, the first stage here is to get as much of the old floodwater sediment off the machine as we can, and we'll worry about the insides once we get all the outsides clean. So Coco's here to help. She loves the water. You want to have a drink? Okay, back off now. I need to clean this up. Back in the shed now, the radio looks a lot better. I did miss a few bits I've noticed when I was washing, but that's fine. We'll give it a better clean up later. The main point of that was just to get all the basic grime off the outside and allow us to start dismantling. The cords I washed up as well as I could, so we'll see how they go. They'll just need to dry out really thoroughly. I have noticed that the screen looks a bit dodgy. I don't know if there's water in there. I would imagine there would be. I think the whole thing would have filled up with water inside, because I don't think they're made to go underwater. They might be okay in a quick shower of rain, but they certainly weren't made to be submerged for a few days. So I'm just going to leave this. I've tipped it over on various angles to drain out any excess water. I'm going to leave it for a day or two before I get back to it, and we'll then start to dismantle it and see what it's like inside and check all the circuit boards. We'll have to pull them all out and give them a good wash so that there's no sediment that's going to cause ongoing corrosion. Hopefully we can not only get this unit to make noise again, but give it another an extended long happy life, rather than just being thrown in the skip, which a lot of flood damaged stuff does without any thought to fixing it. Now I know it takes time, but hopefully I can fix this, and the girls can have it back out at the cafe when they're going again. Okay, it's the next day and I need to get this apart because we don't want to leave it too long, or you can get sort of the mineral salts that were in the water are going to start corroding things. And I did notice that even though I've tipped it over a few times, there's still a little bit of water coming out of it. So we've got to get it apart. So we'll take the casing apart as best we can. I'm not exactly sure how easy it's going to be to do. We'll give it a go. Okay, so now you're going to get to enjoy some super fast dismantling. There was so many screws on this thing, it was just amazing. In fact, you'll see once we get into the electronics, there's actually mostly plastic and decorative pieces to make it look robust and expensive, and when you get into the insides of it, there's actually not much in it. The speakers turned out to be a plastic cone, which is great, so the paper, there was no issues with a paper cone on the speaker. They washed up okay, but I did have a little bit of issues with moisture in them, as you'll see a bit later. So really it was just dismantle lots and lots of screws and work out how things come apart. But we got there eventually and allowed it to see the light of day. Okay, so that's got the main casing apart. It's certainly wet in there, very much so. There's quite a bit of silt and whatnot around the casing, so it does all need a thorough wash out. It would have been completely full of water. So it doesn't look like anything's damaged, which you wouldn't expect to see. The problem's going to be corrosion if it's not dried out. I don't think anything should have shorted because there wasn't any power in here, as I've mentioned earlier. So I'm going to take these little connectors off over here where they're screwed on. I won't unplug the wires, but I'll leave all the wires plugged and just take all the actual mounting brackets off so that all the wires can stay plugged where they are, and then we'll try and take the main board off the back of the front panel. So if we keep all the electronics together, I shouldn't get too confused with what plugs in where. This screw here looks like it may even have a little bit of corrosion already, just within a couple of days. I'm not sure if it's rust or it might have. It's possible that, of course, it could have rusted from moisture ages ago, but I'm not sure about that. It looks like it'll clean up. So yeah, it's important to get into these things fairly quickly. If I was to put it aside for a month, I think it probably wouldn't be worth doing, because you get corrosion on the fine copper tracks and it becomes a massive job. But if we can clean it up, we'll give it a really good flush with some clean water for a start. Then we'll probably give it a rinse in IPA or something, and maybe dry it somehow, maybe with a hairdryer or something, just so that it is totally clean and dry, and then we can put it back together and see how we've gone. But there's certainly still a lot of moisture around here, and we need to get this done as quick as possible. So I've just lifted the main board away from the front panel here, and I don't think there's any issues with this readout. I won't really know until I power things up later, but there was quite a lot of water sandwiched between the front glass and the display. I think that's what we could see from the outside. So hopefully we're all right here. So we pretty well have isolated this front panel now. All we have here is one little device. What's this? It'd be a switch. Oh, it's the volume, I think. Where are we? Yeah, the volume. Oh, look at the water drip off it. So we'll have to try and get that off too. I think we need to have that nice and clean. So we'll give this a really good wash in some nice fresh water for a start. And we might have to try and get the volume control off. Okay, the electronics have now been surgically removed. There's not actually a lot to it, is there, really? You've got that main board there with the controls on the front and the LCD screen. And then you've simply just got a lot of little peripheral boards, which are basically just input sockets, connectors for the battery, and there's a micro switch on one of them, just there. And the volume control I did take out. I did have to unsolder the antenna lead, which is a shielded wire, so there's two solder joints there, which actually went just right on the corner of that top board there. So you can see the mineral deposits on the board now, can't you? So, and they will be salts, and they will cause corrosion and issues down the track if we don't get them clean. So I'm going to dunk this entire conglomerate here of electronics in a bucket of nice fresh water, and I'll give them a really good rinse. And I might give them just with a soft brush just to clean all those mineral deposits off the board. And all the switches and everything as well, I'll give them a really good flush out with water. I'm just going to use tap water, which will have minerals and salts in it, I guess, to a degree, but nothing like the Floodwater. And then I'm going to try and rinse it in IPA and maybe blow a bit of clean compressed air through it. And we'll get it as clean as we can. We will then spray all the switches and potentiometers and any other controls with a deoxit to put some protection onto the terminals and the tracks, and it also has a small percentage of lubrication in it which will lube the joints. I think that's probably all I can do, and hopefully it's enough. As for the rest of the case, I am going to take it apart as much as I can. All the decorative sort of brackets and things on the front of this, I think they unscrew. I'll take them all off and I'll give that a really good wash up in warm soapy water and let that dry thoroughly, and that should be fine. You can certainly see, I think that's even a little bit of corrosion starting to happen there. This panel where the speaker screws into certainly looks like it's got all sorts of muck over it. The speakers I think will be fine. I think they're not actually a paper cone, they're like a thin plastic cone. So I reckon they'll wash up okay. Hopefully there shouldn't be any damage there. So I've just finished giving the circuit board and the accessories here a really good wash in warm tap water. I've given it a brush over. I've actually unplugged every single plug and socket and plugged it back in. I've slid the boots back here. So we should have got rid of all the floodwaters from that. The actual water looks a little bit scummy on top, depends on the angle. But yes, there's certainly been some impurities come off the electronics. I'm going to take it from this tap water and give it a rinse in distilled water, because the tap water in many cases has chlorine in it, and there will be other mineral salts in your everyday tap water. So distilled water should leave it fairly clean and less likely to have any mineral salts on it, and then I will give it a rinse with IPA as well. So we should get a pretty clean and non-contaminated bunch of electronics out of that. And so all I need to do now is to wash up the rest of the case, as I've said, and we'll dry it all thoroughly before putting it back together. So how do you like your speakers? Sunny side up? I've given these a good rinse as much as I can, and I thought they'd be fine. The actual cones aren't paper, they're like a plastic, so the cone should be okay. But as I was drying them, I kept getting drips coming out of the back of the speaker area, so it looks like there's still a bit of sediment around there. So anyway, I've put them on the little hot plate here to just heat the speakers up a bit to try and dry any moisture out. I'm not sure if any of the sediment has got in around the voice coil or not. They still feel to move okay, so we've got a bit of heat into them now, so hopefully at least that will dry them out completely. Hopefully they work. So the circuitry now has had a rinse in tap water and a brush off, and then a good rinse in distilled water, and I've scrubbed it all with a toothbrush. I've tried to get every little part. I've plugged and unplugged all the connectors numerous times. Look, I'm still a little concerned. I don't know that we're going to be able to ever get all the potential corrosion issues out of this. I did notice a spot on the circuit here. I'm not sure if you can see it. It looks a little corroded on that track there. I might have to have a look under my microscope. And I did notice that the switches here, and you can probably see them in the screen here, around the base of the switches, it's that brownish kind of rusty look. Maybe the metal's starting to rust. I don't know what the switches are like inside. I can certainly spray them all with deoxit. But yeah, look, you just don't know. I mean, the water's been soaking everywhere. So I'm not as hopeful as perhaps I was at the start. But it's all cleaned off now. I'm going to try and give it a rinse and a scrub with IPA. And then I'll put some deoxit in all the plugs and all the connectors. I've given it a really good dry off. The board's actually quite warm. I went and borrowed Christine's hairdryer, and she did give me the go-ahead for it, so that's good. And I got the board fairly hot. In fact, all the components I got fairly hot. They should be totally dry. You can heat circuit boards. I once fixed a TV main circuit board in an oven by remelting all the solder, reflowing all the solder. So the board got really hot. It wasn't hot enough to actually drop all the components off, but it got hot enough to start to reflow the solder. And you won't affect the components with that sort of heat. So the hairdryer is not going to have any troubles. So hopefully we're right. We'll give it a go, but I don't know. I'm not quite as confident as I was. So just having a look at this spot on the board through the microscope, and we can see that it's very crusty looking. I don't know if it's just, actually now looking at that, looks like it might be just a bit of gunk on top of the board. It hopefully hasn't damaged the tracks. Yeah, that's good. Should scrub off. I'm not sure what that is. But even after a good scrub, there's still all this stuff everywhere. It may have been something that's actually dissolved in the water. I'm not sure. We'll try and clean that off. But at least the tracks look okay under there. I thought it was corrosion when I first saw it. Okay, so here's what we're up with the electronics. I have wiped everything over thoroughly with some IPA and some cotton buds. I've basically scrubbed anywhere that looked like it had any contamination or corrosion, and around all these switches as best I could. And then I took all the joiners apart and sprayed every contact with this deoxit F5. And I got some also in the volume control, and hopefully that gives it a little bit of lubrication again, because it might have lost all that being submerged for so long. I'm still a little concerned about all these switches showing a little bit of corrosion, and I think that's going to be the weakest part of this. But I did get some deoxit into all of those, and they seem to click very nicely. However, I don't really know if they're going to have ongoing problems. But I think we've done all we can. It's time now to start reassembling and, cross all of our fingers. Now, I think I forgot to film all this before I started assembling. I have put the front panel back together. I did take these brackets out to get to the push button parts of the switch, and I've just put all these the chrome bars back on the front and the panel into that housing. You can see there was a lot of parts here, lots of screws, but it's all ready to go back together. So I'll start the assembly, work it all out, and I'm just about ready to remount this board back in the front panel here, and we'll get back to you once it's together. And there we have it, the radio's back together. It looks a lot better than it did when I first brought it here. Although in saying that, as much as you concentrate on scrubbing every little piece with a toothbrush, there's still parts where there's this sort of silt and swamp water's got in that I didn't manage to get out. But anyway, I'm confident that it's clean. I am a little embarrassed to admit that there's one screw left over. Now, I haven't done that for years. I'm usually pretty thorough. I suspect it's just one of these moulding pieces. Might have had one in each corner and maybe one at the top or something. It won't be an issue, but all the same, it doesn't normally happen. So now the time of truth, the moment of truth. Let's give it a test and let's see if the thing powers up and works. I have the power supply in my little workshop room, so let's go into there. And I did give this a quick wash up in a bucket of water as well, but again it still has signs of sediment in places, so hopefully it's going to be okay. I assume these things are sealed and I couldn't hear any water in it, but I'm not actually sure if it's going to work, so we'll plug it in and see if the radio powers up. Well, a little bit of a snap, crackle and pop, and my circuit breaker and my fuse box blew. It turns out that these clearly aren't waterproof. I plugged it in, heard a little bit of an electronic crackle and pop, the circuit breaker blew. So obviously this is an issue. So I don't think we can fix that because it's probably fried something in there. We would have to break the plastic to get in and have a look. Anyway, it's not worthwhile. You can buy these little mains power packs pretty cheaply. It's a 12 volt one. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to snip the wire to use the plug, and I will put my power supply onto that to give this unit 12 volts, and hopefully that's the last of our problems. So I now have this wire plugged into my bench power supply, and I just basically cut the end and tinned the ends and connected it up to some leads. Let's see if we have 12 volts, which is what my supply says. And if all's good here, then we can actually power the radio up. And it looks like just over 12, which is around about what my readout says on the bench meter, bench power supply. Alright, the moment of truth. Can you see there? I'll alter the camera a bit. And let's see if we have some action. So I don't have the actual battery for this, but it was being run off the mains, so I'm assuming we can just plug it in and turn it on. And hopefully we don't get any electronic crackles or sparks here. Power. We still have some moisture in the display, that's a bugger. But it looks like it's going to work. That moisture must be within the LCD display. I didn't even feel like trying to take that apart. What's happened here? Presets 1, 2, these aren't working. Band.
Oh, thank you so much. You made my year.
Okay, so that is working. I'm not sure if these switches are playing up or whether it has to be on a certain... We certainly have music, advanced, info, band, we better change that. Well, that switch appears to be working fine. Our presets don't work. Oh, that did. Okay, they are. Sometimes. And unless they haven't been set, of course. Oh, that one's changed. There we go. That one. Alright, so they are starting to work. I would suggest that probably because I've sprayed a bit of inox in there, they do need working a fair bit. There might be some corrosion still in them. It might come good once the thing operates for a while and actually warms up. Coco's just come to visit me, if you heard that shaking. So we have radio, that's fantastic. The volume seems to work well. The speakers sound okay. I think it's going to be a matter of info. What's info do? I don't know. Alright, so the buttons seem to be working. Except I don't know what info does. No service. FM. Not sure. I probably should give it back to the girls and let they know how to use it. I haven't used one of these ones before. But it looks like we're at least going to be able to have the radio, which is really all they wanted, and that's what it is. And it sounds like it's going to be okay. So I'll call it fixed. However, these switches I'm still a little bit suspect on. They do tend to work now. But whether they're going to play up down the track, I don't know. We'll call it fixed now, and I will certainly put a comment underneath As this video ages and, you know, a few months down the track, I might put a comment underneath saying it stopped working, you know, it's a bit of a failure, or it's still going and it's all working fine and we'll call it a success. But you can see the trouble I went to. You can see how the corrosion is going to cause an issue. Certainly things that have been submerged in floodwaters are a challenge.
Well, firstly,
okay, I'm going to call this baby fixed. I've been playing it here for an hour or so in the shed. It's going really well. The buttons are even responding much better now. You just got to hold them in a little bit, so perhaps that's just a quirk of the radio, but they all seem to work fine now. So I'm pretty happy with that. Hopefully it lasts. Hopefully there's no ongoing issues with those little switches on the circuit boards. You can actually replace them, and that would probably be worthwhile doing. But my purpose of this video was to see if we could save this from flood damage, and clearly it works. I did, as you saw, well, you didn't see, but as I explained, the power supply was fried. I cracked it open just to have a look, and there was moisture in there. There's sediment all over the little board there. You can still see the moisture in there. So clearly those things are not waterproof, and perhaps the only way to save them is to actually crack them open before you plug them in, because the water was never going to evaporate and the sediment on the board was never going to disappear on its own. So I guess you could crack them open, because they break open fairly easy just with a tap with a hammer, and you could just silicone them back on. So if you have a power pack that's gone under floodwaters, expect it to fry things if you plug it in, even if it's a few weeks down the track. I think you would need to open it up and dry them out first. But they're relatively cheap to replace. So the main radio, which is a fairly expensive one, we have going. I'll give this back to the guys. They can give it a good test. And as I said earlier, I'll report down the track if the thing's still going. But I'm going to give that a thumbs up. Okay guys, we'll finish up now. The radio is going really well. I've been playing it all afternoon. I've already reprogrammed all the radio stations to my favourite stations. But I think we'll give this a thumbs up, a successful repair. Hopefully it stays good. I will have to organise another power pack for it. But there you go. Saved from the floodwaters, saved from the rubbish skip. I do have a TV to try and check. Given the troubles and the issues I had inside this one, it might be a challenge. I don't know about water within the screen. We'll have a look at that next video, or won't be next one, but when I get around to it soon. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.